Welcome to today's deep dive.
What's
We're going to be taking a look at a really interesting topic:
Okay.
emotionally immature parents, and how that impacts, children growing up and relationships and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
And
it's a good one.
yeah, we're going to be using the book "Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents"
Oh, cool.
by Lindsay C. Gibson to help guide us along.
Okay.
So,
Sounds good.
if you're listening out there and this is something that maybe resonates with you,
Right.
hopefully we can unearth some helpful information.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so
It's a topic that a lot of people don't realize even is a thing.
right.
They might just think, oh, my mom or my dad is just kind of a jerk or whatever, but
Yeah.
there's actually like
Just how?
psychological stuff behind it.
Right. Yeah, it's not just like a
Okay.
personality quirk. It's like
Right.
there's something deeper there.
Yeah, there's stuff that happened to them probably when they were kids that made them that way. So yeah.
So let's imagine, right?
Okay.
Like you're a kid
Yeah.
and you feel like you're more mature than your parent.
Oh, wow.
How does that impact a child?
Well, I mean, emotionally, you're going to feel really lonely and neglected.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
like
You need that.
as a child, you depend on your parents for like emotional
Validation and support and all of that.
support and just like emotional connection. And if
Yeah.
you're not getting that from your parents, you're going to feel really alone.
Right.
And,
Like you said, neglect.
and neglected. Yeah. And so these parents that are emotionally immature, what ends up happening is that their emotional needs get
Yeah.
prioritized over their child's needs.
Yeah.
And the kid ends up feeling kind of like an accessory to the parent's life
Right.
rather than, the center of their world like a child should be.
Yeah. That makes me think of Sophie's story
Yeah.
in the book.
Uh-huh.
She was saying that she would keep getting into these relationships.
Right. That were very similar
Yeah.
to the relationship she had with her parents. Like
Yeah.
she was seeking out that same dynamic.
That's what's familiar.
Yeah.
And sometimes, even though consciously you're like, I don't want to be treated this way,
Yeah.
you're almost
Yeah.
attracted to it because
Yeah.
it's what you,
It's what you know.
Yeah.
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 So,
And that's why it's so important to like understand the characteristics of emotionally immature parents.
right.
So you
can
can,
identify it.
yeah, break the cycle.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into that then.
Okay.
What are some of the hallmarks of an emotionally immature parent?
Well, one of the biggest ones is
Yeah.
being ruled by their feelings.
Yeah.
So,
It's all about them.
everything has to be about how they feel,
Right.
you know?
Their needs are paramount.
Their needs above everyone else's needs.
Yeah.
And they're also like really self-preoccupied,
Yeah.
like they're like almost narcissistic in a way.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
And they lack insight.
Right.
They don't self-reflect. They
Uh.
don't take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
So it's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah. Like they can't
They're their fault.
see the bigger picture.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to even reason with these people.
Right.
Because
They just,
at the-
they're not open to it.
they're the victim.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting you say that because that makes me think of that story in the book about the dad
Uh-huh.
who built this giant porch swing
Oh, yeah.
for his daughter's tiny deck
Oh my gosh. Yes.
and like didn't even consult her.
yeah.
He just decided this is what
This is what she needs.
she needs and I'm going to do it for her.
Yes.
And
it's like, it was such
like they want to be
like a misguided.
they want to be the hero,
Yeah.
but they're not even thinking about what the other person wants,
Right.
Yeah.
It's like they get it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's totally misguided.
Yeah.
Another big one is lack of empathy.
Okay.
So,
So what do you mean by
so
the
they
lack of empathy? Because some people might be like,
yeah.
oh, well, my parents,
They seem to
Yeah.
cared. Yeah, they cared for me.
they might be able to recognize emotions, but they don't have what Gibson calls resonant empathy.
What is resonant empathy?
It's the ability to like really connect with another person's feelings and share in their experience.
Right.
Like,
So it's not just knowing that somebody's sad.
Yeah.
It's like feeling their sadness with them, like
Mhm.
actually understanding their internal experience.
yeah,
So,
like to put it in an analogy, it's like
yeah, it's like the difference between
seeing something
seeing somebody shivering
out in the cold.
out in the cold and actually feeling cold yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like experiencing.
Experiencing it with them.
Yeah. And so like emotionally immature parents would be more like,
Right.
oh, you're sad?
Uh-huh.
Okay, well,
Get over it.
here's a candy bar.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like they
Yeah, I
can't
don't know how to
relate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're uncomfortable with it.
Right.
you know?
So they just want
So
to
they just kind of shut it down.
shut it down.
Yeah.
Which makes the child feel very unseen.
That reminds me of Ellie's story
Whoa.
with her
stuffed animal.
stuffed animal.
Yeah.
Like that was her.
Her mom just gave it away,
Yeah.
didn't think twice about it.
Right.
You know, Ellie's attachment to it
Yeah, it was like
meant nothing.
a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, that makes the kid feel like they're not
Yeah.
really a person in their own right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of leads us into then the different types of emotionally immature parents.
Exactly.
So the book outlines...
Gibson outlines 4 main types.
Okay.
There's the emotional parent, the driven parent, the passive parent, and the rejecting parent.
Okay, so let's take each of those and like break them down a little bit.
Okay.
So starting with the emotional parent.
Okay. So the emotional parent is like the most volatile type.
Oh, okay.
They're ruled by their moods. You know, they're up and down. You're always like walking on eggshells around them.
Right.
Because you never know what you're going to get.
Right. Yeah. So like
And so their emotions kind of like rule the whole household. It's like everybody has to cater to their
mood.
Their mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they're having a bad day,
everybody's having a bad day.
Everyone's having a bad day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that reminds me.
That makes me think of Brittany.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah.
His mother,
Shonda, who actually locked her out of the house.
Yeah.
When she was sick as a kid.
When she was...
Like, that just seems so...
The reason she did it was because she couldn't handle seeing her daughter sick.
Like, it was too much.
It was too much for her.
For her.
Yeah, it was like too upsetting for her.
Wow.
So she's like, I need to see you up and about.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
If you're going to be sick, you can't be in my house.
Wow. So, like, the parents' needs were so...
Above the child's needs.
Above the child's. It's just unbelievable.
Totally.
Wow.
Okay, so we've got... Okay, so then we have the driven parent.
The driven parent.
No.
So, like, what are some of their characteristics?
So they seem very invested in their children's lives.
Okay. So at first glance...
At first glance...
They might seem like good parents.
They might seem like good parents.
Right.
But it's all about control.
Okay.
And it's about their own vision
of how
things should be.
The child should be.
Right. Yeah. And so
they're the ones that are always like...
They're the ones that are always pushing their kids to achieve.
Right.
And, you know, making sure they get into the right schools and, you know, all this stuff. And it's
all about their...
It's all about their ego.
Ego and making them look good.
Yeah. Like, my kid's the best.
My kid's the best.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. But not really.
Yeah, but they're not really attuned to what the child actually wants.
Right.
Or needs.
Yeah.
You know?
And so the kid can feel...
So the kid can feel very inadequate.
Right.
You know?
Like they're never measuring up.
Never measuring up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really damaging to their self-esteem.
Okay. So then we have the passive parent.
Passive parent.
So the passive parent.
Okay. What do they look like?
So they're kind of like emotionally detached.
Okay.
You know, they're
present but not really present.
Right.
Yeah.
Physically there but not emotionally there.
They're kind of like checked out emotionally.
Okay. So they're not.
And so the kid ends up feeling very unsupported.
We're not getting their needs met at all.
Yeah. And unprotected.
Yeah.
You know, like
because
they're
like they don't really advocate for their kids.
Right. They're just kind of like there.
They just kind of like let things happen.
Yeah. And the kid's left.
The kid ends up feeling very alone.
Alone to fend for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very lonely experience.
And then the last one is the rejecting parent.
The rejecting parent, yes.
So this is like the
worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario, yeah. So
is it
so they're openly hostile and dismissive of the child's needs and feelings.
Right.
They're cold. They're critical. You know, they can even be verbally abusive.
Wow. So like
it's the most extreme form of like emotional neglect.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it can have like devastating consequences for the child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So we got these 4 different types of parents, but
and they're all rooted in...
They're all coming from this place of...
Emotional immaturity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does a child...
So how do they adapt?
At this environment?
Yeah. Like, that's a good question.
How do they deal with that?
Well, they tend to develop like coping mechanisms.
Okay.
And there's kind of 2 main categories.
Okay. Give us
internalizing and externalizing.
Those two.
Yeah.
Okay.
So internalizers, they
Yeah.
kind of like internalize their problems.
Yeah.
They blame themselves. They become very responsible.
Right. Like overly responsible.
Overly responsible, yeah. And they try to like fix things and please other people
Right.
to try to gain like a sense of control.
So they become like the people pleasers.
Yeah, the people pleasers.
Yeah.
You know?
Like if I'm good enough.
Yeah.
Then
If I'm good enough, then maybe they'll love me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they end up feeling very resentful and exhausted.
Yeah, because they're constantly overextending themselves.
Giving.
Yeah, yeah. And then you have the externalizers.
Okay, so
So they project their problems outward.
Okay.
They blame other people for their unhappiness.
Right.
They can be impulsive. They can act out.
Yeah.
And they have a hard time taking responsibility for their actions.
Always someone else's fault.
Always somebody else's fault, yeah.
And that makes me think of Rodney's story
Yes.
from the book.
Yeah.
You know, on the surface, he seemed like...
He seemed like an internalizer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really...
But really, he was blaming his wife.
For everything.
For all his unhappiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, he was taking it out on her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's...
So these coping mechanisms are...
Like, it can be complex.
They're very complex.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
not
not always black and white.
like one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about then
Okay.
these internalizers and these healing fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
What is that all about?
Okay, so healing fantasies are basically like
Okay.
these imagined scenarios
Okay.
that kids create in their minds
Right.
to cope with emotional neglect.
Okay.
So they might believe, you know, if I'm good enough,
Right.
or if I'm helpful enough,
Yeah.
or if I'm quiet enough,
Right.
then my parent will finally love me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's a way of like
They're creating the
creating hope.
false hope,
Yeah, false hope.
but hope nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a way of coping. Like if I can just figure out the right formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can just be perfect enough, then they'll love me.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
And then along with that,
you were talking about these role selves.
the role selves, yes.
What are those?
So the role selves are like these adapted personas that
Right.
kids take on to kind of like fit into the family dynamic.
Okay.
So they might become the responsible one,
Right.
you know, the peacemaker,
Yeah.
the invisible child.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I'll just disappear.
it's all about kind of molding themselves into what they think their parents need them to be,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. But then that becomes a problem
It becomes a problem
Looks-
later on
yeah.
because
because you're not
you're not being your true self.
living yourself.
You're performing,
Yeah.
you know?
And then
And then that gets in the way of like
right.
genuine connection with other people.
So how do you break out of that?
That's a great question.
Like how do you even start to?
It's a process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that
And we'll get into that next
more
time.
next time.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you in part 2.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye. It's a journey, and it usually starts with some sort of breakdown.
Oh, a breakdown.
Yeah. But like in a good way,
What do you mean?
like you hit a wall
Okay.
and all those old coping mechanisms, they're not working anymore.
Right?
You know, those old patterns, those roles.
Yeah.
They just don't work anymore.
So it's less about like falling apart and more about
It's more about awareness,
yeah.
like a shift in awareness. Like you
Yeah.
finally realize,
Right.
okay, I can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
This isn't working.
And the book calls this positive disintegration,
Yes.
which sounds a little scary, but it's like
Ah.
the idea that sometimes you have to go through.
You have to go through a difficult time in order to grow.
Yeah.
It's like those challenges, they actually force you to change.
Yeah, like Virginia's panic attacks
Yes.
in the book.
Mm-hmm.
She was having these panic attacks, but it led her to realize.
It led her to realize that she was putting her brother on a pedestal
Right.
and that she was allowing him to control her emotions.
Yeah, and like
And that she had a choice to disengage.
she didn't have to keep.
She didn't have to keep playing that role.
Yeah, like her body was like, no,
Oh,
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Okay, so then once you have that breakdown, that awakening,
yeah,
what happens?
that's when the real work begins.
Okay,
So you have to start shedding those old roles.
right. Those masks.
Those masks, yeah.
Yeah,
And you have to challenge those critical voices in your head
right.
that tell you you're not good enough.
Like the echoes of those.
Yes, the echoes of the emotionally immature parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the book talks a lot about self-compassion
Yes, self-compassion is key. Okay.
because you have to treat yourself with kindness.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
like you would treat
Yeah.
like you would treat a good friend,
Yes.
you know?
And like recognize that we're all imperfect.
We're all imperfect.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's
So,
okay.
like, letting go of that need to be perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that freedom that comes with that
Yeah.
is
It's
amazing.
when you finally let go
Uh-huh.
of trying to please everyone
Yes.
and be perfect.
It's so liberating.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of Mike's story in the book.
Oh, yeah, Mike.
Yeah, he went through a divorce and he had some financial hardships,
Right.
but he was happy
Yeah.
because he finally let go of needing validation from other people.
Right.
He realized that true success was about living according to his own values.
Right. Not what other people thought he should do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like taking back your power.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's about empowerment.
So then as we start to like step into this newfound freedom,
Yeah.
and we're letting go of all of that old baggage,
Right.
how do we set boundaries
Yes. Boundaries are crucial,
with those emotionally immature people in our lives?
especially with emotionally immature parents.
Yeah.
Because
Because those old patterns can
the
be
patterns are hard to break.
really hard to break.
Yeah.
Because they're so ingrained.
And like the book gives some good advice on like
Yes.
preparing yourself for the pushback,
Oh, yeah.
the guilt trips.
The guilt trips.
Yeah.
Because change can be very threatening to emotionally immature people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like they're going to do whatever they can to
They want to maintain the status quo.
keep things the same.
Yeah.
Like Brad's mom,
Yes.
who he finally had to ask to move out
Yeah.
because
He had to prioritize.
he had to prioritize his family.
His own family.
Yeah.
It's like,
And that's the thing about boundaries.
it's not selfish.
It's not selfish.
It's self-preservation.
It's about taking care of yourself
Yeah.
and creating a life that feels good to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we start to move away from these emotionally draining relationships,
Yes.
what should we be looking for in healthier connections?
Okay. So emotionally mature people, they respect boundaries.
Okay.
They understand that you're a separate person with your
Right.
own thoughts and feelings and needs.
Yeah.
And they honor that.
So you finally feel
You feel seen,
and heard.
heard,
Yeah. And it's not about,
and they value you for who you are,
right.
not for who they want you to be.
Yeah. And they're reciprocal
They are reciprocal.
in the relationship.
Yeah.
It's not all one-sided.
They give back.
Yeah.
They contribute.
Like they're not just taking
They're not just taking.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Dan's story from the book,
Yes.
where he was used to giving so much.
Yeah, he was a giver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he met this woman who,
appreciated his generosity
Yeah.
and wanted to give back in return.
so it was like
It was a balance.
equal give and take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're good communicators.
Okay.
They're open to feedback.
Okay.
They listen without judgment.
They don't get defensive.
They don't get defensive.
Yeah.
And they're willing to work through conflicts.
Right.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they make you feel safe
Yes.
to be yourself.
To be your authentic self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like finding that safe haven where you can finally,
You can finally relax and be yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then as you surround yourself with those kinds of people,
Yeah.
like it changes how you interact with the world.
It does.
Yeah.
It's like a ripple effect.
So you start setting better boundaries
You
and
communicate your needs more clearly.
right.
You're not afraid to say what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you've seen it modeled.
You've seen it modeled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like it all starts to come together.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that kind of brings us to like developing new relationship habits.
Yes.
So like being mindful
Yeah.
of how we're interacting
And how we interact.
with
Right.
people
Yes.
and like how we're communicating.
Yes.
It's
And
like-
how we're responding to other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the book talks a lot about like,
It encourages you to reflect on
Yeah.
your own patterns
right,
and to consider new ways of relating
that feel.
that feel good to you,
Yeah.
that are aligned with your values.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like taking ownership
Yes.
of your part.
Of your part in the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, we've talked about a lot,
We have.
but I feel like there's still so much more
There is.
to unpack.
Yeah.
Feels like we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully it's given everyone out there listening some
Yeah.
good things to think about and like
Yeah.
a new perspective.
Absolutely. It's all about like empowering yourself
Right.
to recognize that you have a choice.
Yeah.
You know,
You don't have to
you don't have to stay stuck in those old patterns.
be a victim.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can break free.
And I love how the book talks about like that sense of liberation
Yes.
when you finally let go.
When you let go of those healing fantasies.
Yeah.
It's like,
Like Carolyn in the
Oh,
book, when she
mhm.
finally realized that,
that she wasn't just a bit character in somebody else's story.
right,
She could actually like step off the page.
Yeah.
You know,
It's powerful.
it's powerful. Yeah.
So as we're like stepping into this new way of being
Right.
and we're doing the work,
Uh-huh.
how do we deal with those inner critics?
Ah, the inner critic.
Yeah.
Yeah, those voices can be so loud.
Yeah.
But the book suggests that you approach them
Okay.
with the same awareness
Okay.
that you would with an emotionally immature parent.
So it's like,
Ah.
instead of getting caught up in that negativity,
Yeah, just observe it.
yeah,
Yeah.
observe those thoughts, but
Wow.
don't engage.
Hooked in.
Yeah. And don't let their judgments
Define you.
define you exactly. It's
Yes.
about recognizing that you're a work in progress.
Right.
And offering yourself grace.
Like you would offer it to.
Like you would offer it to a friend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
We're all imperfect.
It all comes back to that.
It all comes back to self-compassion.
Self-compassion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we do that,
Yeah.
then we can start to
You start to heal.
heal and see
And you
things
see things differently.
in a new light.
Yeah, through a new lens.
Yeah. And then as we start to
And then you start to
recognize those
yeah, those emotionally healthy people.
healthy people,
Yeah.
we can start surrounding ourselves
Yeah.
with people that are good for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're creating a new family for yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
A chosen family.
Chosen family. Yeah.
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 So really, a lot of what we talked about today
It applies?
it applies to all relationships,
any relationship.
not just your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we just want to leave everyone listening with this.
Okay.
You are not defined by your past,
That's right.
by your parents.
Or by the roles you played.
You have the power
Yes.
to break free.
To heal and create a life you love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes courage.
It does.
It takes self-compassion,
Uh-huh.
but it's so worth it.
It's so worth it.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
And remember,
Remember.
the most fulfilling journeys often begin with a single step.
That's right.